What will happen when AI is better than people at every single job task? We aren't there yet, but we could get there soon, certainly in my lifetime. Remember, right now is the worst AI will ever be. And we've consistently underestimated the speed of progress. I know I have. So what happens when machines are better than people at literally everything? At that point, work will disappear, right? Wrong. And today, I'm going to explain why. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Context Window. Today, we are doing a deep dive on how I think AI will change work and what skills and jobs will be most valuable in the future. In part one today, I'll explain why I do not think AGI or ASI will be the end of human work, but rather an opportunity for us to focus on what we do best. In part two, coming next week, I'll tell you what kinds of skills and jobs I think will be most valuable in the age of AI. I'm a labor economist, and I've been studying topics like skills, jobs, and education for more than 20 years. Well before AI came along, I was interested in questions like how technology changes the value of different skills and what makes people more productive at work. And while I can't say I'm the most tech-savvy person around, I tend to be an early adopter because I like to tinker and experiment with new technologies. No one has a crystal ball, no one can tell the future for sure, but with new technologies, you can sometimes get a murky glimpse through a glass darkly, if you're into scripture or Ingmar Bergman films. So when ChatGPT dropped in late 2022, I tried it right away. And even in that primitive early form, it was clear to me that things were probably going to change. I didn't realize how fast they were going to change, or at least how fast the technology would improve. But by late 2023, I had pivoted most of my research to AI. I've since written 7 papers on some aspect of AI, including the first nationally representative survey of generative AI adoption in the US, and an experiment asking whether people who are good at managing teams of humans are also good at managing teams of AI agents. Spoiler alert, yes, they are. Management's the same skill, whether the workers are human or silicon. Maybe I'll talk about that in a future podcast. I've got a bunch of other papers on AI in the pipeline. The point is, why am I doing all this? My pre-ChatGPT research was down the fairway labor economics with a focus on education, especially higher education and job training. And after a decade of plugging away, I felt I understood the labor economics landscape pretty well. When I started my career, I would regularly experience surprise and delight. I'd read a paper I'd never read before and I'd say, wow, that's interesting. I never thought of that. And that feeling got increasingly rare as I aged and acquired more seasoning. But AI is new and exciting, and I felt early on that it might shake things up. If you're a skier, AI is like a powder day for labor economists. Everything is new again, and there are fresh tracks just waiting to be explored and chewed up. And yet, I know that my sense of wonder is privilege. I'm very lucky to be economically secure with a tenured professorship at a great university. I can study AI with detachment from the consequences. For many others, that wonder and awe has quickly given way to fear as AI keeps improving. So, back to the question I opened with. You can be an AI skeptic, I get that, and you might be right. But let's put aside your skepticism for just a moment and ask what happens when we have functional artificial general intelligence, or ASI, artificial superintelligence, meaning machines are better than people at literally everything. Work disappears, right? Right? Wrong. That common sense intuition is wrong because of one of the oldest and most important ideas in economics, the principle of comparative advantage. The famous mathematician Stanislaw Ulam once challenged Nobel laureate and grandfather of modern neoclassical economics, Paul Samuelson, to name one proposition, just one, in the social sciences that was true and non-trivial. Ulam was from a wealthy Jewish family in Poland, and because of his mathematical prowess, he was invited to visit the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton in 1935 at a very young age, and then the Harvard Society of Fellows from 1936 to 1939. In August of 1939, he traveled with his 17-year-old brother to the US from Poland, and 11 days later, the Germans invaded Poland. The family they left behind, his sister, his mother and father, and all of his family, perished in the Holocaust. Stanislaw asked John von Neumann to find him a war job, became an American citizen 2 years later in 1941, and ended up working on the creation of the atomic bomb through the Manhattan Project. His brother Adam, who was 17 years old when they came over, became an eminent political scientist here at Harvard and an expert criminologist. Anyway, Ulam used to tease Paul Samuelson about the supposed irrelevance of the social scientists. That hit Samuelson especially hard because he, more than anyone, was responsible for bringing mathematical formalism and scientific rigor into economics. He wrestled with Ulam's tease provocation for nearly 30 years. But in a 1969 essay, he proclaimed that the answer to Ulam's question was Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage. Comparative advantage is the true and non-trivial insight that two countries can trade goods for mutual benefit even if country A is better than country B at producing every single good. Samuelson says about comparative advantage, quote, that it is logically true need not be argued before a mathematician. That it is non-trivial is attested by the thousands of important and intelligent men who have never been able to grasp the doctrine for themselves or to believe it after it was explained to them. So, if you give me 5 minutes, I will explain this true and non-trivial concept so that you can understand something that many important and powerful people have not understood, to their and to our great sorrow. In a way, comparative advantage is really about positive sum thinking rather than zero sum thinking. Is there a fixed pie we're all fighting over, or can we work together to make a bigger pie? David Ricardo developed this concept of comparative advantage in 1817 in his book On the Principles of Political Economy and Taxation. His classic example considered the case of two countries, England and Portugal, making two goods, cloth and wine. He assumed that citizens of both countries wanted to consume both goods. Everybody loves wine and nobody wants to leave the house naked. And that labor could not move across countries. In his example, workers in Portugal could produce more cloth and more wine per hour of labor than England, meaning they had an absolute advantage in both goods. And yet, as he showed mathematically, the countries could produce more total wine and cloth if they specialized in what they were good at. You can probably guess which is which. In other words, citizens of both countries would be better off by specializing and trading versus producing everything themselves, what economists call autarky. And this is the origin of the common phrase, gains from trade. Okay, now here is a key point. The same logic of comparative advantage, two countries specializing in what they're best at and trading for mutual benefit, also applies to teamwork. I introduced this idea more formally in a paper I wrote a few years ago called The Growing Importance of Social Skills in the Labor Market. I discovered that teamwork was becoming a more important part of modern economic production, and that jobs requiring more teamwork were growing faster and paying higher wages than other jobs. The reason is directly related to Ricardo's theory. There are gains from trade, but instead of countries trading goods, it's workers trading tasks. As economies become more complex, workers can specialize more and achieve gains from trade through teamwork. If you think about it, you and I probably have different skill sets. We don't know each other, but that's a fair assumption. And if we're going to work together, we should coordinate, meaning we should talk amongst ourselves and figure out who's good at what and agree on a good division of labor, with each of us specializing in the things we're best at, our comparative advantages. It's intuitive, right? We all know we can get more done when we work together with talented people who bring different skills to the table. Teamwork really does make the dream work. Of course, we've all had painful experiences on teams too, and that's because it takes some time and effort to coordinate. Sometimes that meeting really could have been an email. I've read several recent articles that gesture at the importance of human comparative advantage for understanding how work will change in the age of AI. But I want to make the argument really carefully and precisely here. Hopefully that will help you understand this true but non-trivial principle. In the paper I mentioned before I wrote about social skills, I wrote down a formal economic model of task trade between people with lots of Greek letters. I'm going to spare you that today, but here's a simple example I used to work through when I presented the paper at economics departments and other seminars. It gives you all the key intuition, and it also gives me a chance to talk about two of my longtime mentors and collaborators, two of my very favorite people, Claudia Goldin and Larry Katz. So let's think about the production of research papers. If you're following on video, you can see this written on the screen. Let's assume that producing a research paper requires two tasks, just two, data analysis and writing. Of course, it's more than that, but we're trying to make the model as simple as possible here to facilitate understanding. In the paper, I generalize this to a very large number of tasks. The first thing you need to think about is how the two tasks combine to create a paper. So think about this. What if you conduct 100 hours of data analysis, but you never write it up? No paper. You don't have a paper. Likewise, you can spend lots of time making stuff up and writing down different theories, but if you can't test your ideas against the real world, you don't really have a paper either. At least you don't have my kind of paper. Maybe you're a pure theorist. Good luck with that. My point is that tasks are useless on their own. You need both of them to write a paper, data analysis and writing. Economists call this a perfect complements production function. Another example is left shoes and right shoes. If I give you 100 left shoes but no right shoes, you can't walk anywhere. So I'm going to assume for the moment that data analysis and writing are perfect complements in the production of research papers. Now, that's not a necessary assumption, but it makes the math easier to understand. So, Claudia Goldin, one part of this duo, is an outstanding writer. She can produce 6 units of writing per unit of time. Let's call it per year. So 6 units of writing per year. She's also very good at data analysis, and she really is, but not quite as good. She can produce 3 units of data analysis per year. So 6 of writing and 3 of data analysis. For Larry Katz, it's the reverse. He can write 3 papers per year or produce 6 units of data analysis per year. And this is a hypothetical example, but Claudia really is a great writer. Larry, Claudia, and I wrote a paper together many years ago documenting the rapid rise of the for-profit college sector. It turns out that for-profits are really 2 types of colleges rolled into one. Small, specialized trade schools that teach hairstyling and welding and HVAC repair, and large online mega colleges owned by publicly traded companies that ruthlessly exploit federal financial aid policy by charging just enough tuition to vacuum up the Pell Grant Stafford loan dollars and deliver an education that is highly variable at best and at worst exploitative. Claudia came up with the title for the paper, Nimble Critters or Agile Predators. I challenge any frontier AI model to be that creative with title writing. Okay, so here's where the perfect complements production function becomes important. If Claudia Goldin works alone, she can write 2 whole papers per year. Why? Well, because she needs to do both tasks in equal proportion to produce papers, she'll spend twice as much time on the tasks she's half as good at. So she'll spend 2/3 of her time on data analysis, and 2/3 times 3 equals 2. And she'll spend 1/3 of her time on writing, and 1/3 times 6 also equals 2. 2 units of writing and 2 units of data produces 2 full research papers per year. That's pretty good. Better than most economists I know, better than me. The same is true for Katz, but with time allocation reversed. Working alone, they can each produce 2 papers per year for a total of 4 papers per year. Now think about if they write together. They will specialize in their best tasks. They'll each produce 6 units per year of the task they're good at. Writing for Goldin, data for Katz, which means they make 6 total papers per year, much greater than the 4 they would produce when each works alone. And that is the magic of comparative advantage. Now, let's think about a Deming-Katz collaboration, or Deming-Goldin. As I said before, Katz can still produce 3 units of writing or 6 units of data per year. Deming is worse at both. He can only produce 1 unit of writing or 1 unit of data per year. Katz is better at both tasks than Deming, meaning he has absolute advantage. But, as I'll show you in a second, there are still gains from trade. Deming can produce 0.5, half a paper per year on his own. He spends half his time on the data analysis, half his time on the writing, and he gets half a paper per year, or 1 paper every 2 years. Katz can produce 2 papers on his own, just as before. So if you add those 2 together, Deming and Katz, that's a total of 2.5 papers per year if they each work alone. If they collaborate, Deming will specialize in writing, producing 1 unit. Katz then uses 1/6 of his time to produce a matching unit of data for a total of 1 paper. But now, bear with me for a second, Katz has 5/6 of his time left. He'll split that by the same proportions as when he was working alone. Half as much time on data because he's twice as good at it. So you have to multiply 5/6 times 2/3 times 3, and 5/6 times 1/3 times 6. Both calculations give you another 1.67, or 1 2/3 papers, that Katz can produce on his own. If you add that to the 1 paper he co-writes with poor old Deming, you have 2.67, or 2 2/3 total papers per year. That's greater than the 2.5 that they were producing if they worked on their own. So, even though Katz is better than Deming at everything, there are still gains from trade. A gain looks small because the example is small. What matters is that it's positive, and it stays positive no matter how wide the gap gets. And that means when I ask Larry if he wants to write a paper with me, he's going to say yes. So what does this have to do with AI? Well, in my extended metaphor, Deming is the human, and Katz is the superintelligent AI that is better than people at all tasks. Which, by the way, anyone who knows Larry understands why this metaphor tracks. Importantly, the logic of comparative advantage still holds no matter how much better AI Katz gets compared to Deming. Even if he could produce 6,000 units of data analysis per year rather than 6. Comparative advantage is why Deming will still create economic value in a world of artificial superintelligence. 3 cheers for the human race. So we worked through a detailed example with numbers to make the argument precise, but let's just step back for a minute. The key insight from the principle of comparative advantage is that people, even when they are less skilled, are almost always additive to a production process if you structure it right. In sports, in movies, and stage productions, we say things all the time like, everybody has a small part to play. You just have to make the most of it. If you have one line in the movie, you can make it sing. And that's true for human AI teams too. Even if the AIs are way better than us at everything, they won't do everything. And the human tasks may end up being really valuable because they are scarce. AI will one day be a commodity widely available. If you have a skill that no one else has, and you can inject it into a mostly AI-driven process in the right way, a lot of the value will accrue to you. Think about farming now versus in ancient times. Machines now do 99.9% of the work that was previously done by humans. But that 0.1% is still human, and it's very high leverage and important. And I suspect we're going to see something very similar with AI. So the important question becomes, what is the human comparative advantage over machines? What are our highest leverage tasks? Meaning, in which job tasks are humans relatively, not absolutely, more efficient? Before we get into that, an important caveat to this argument. For the logic of comparative advantage to work, there has to be some opportunity cost of the AI's time. I've argued about this many times with my friend Tom Cunningham, who used to work at OpenAI and now works at the AI nonprofit Model Evaluation and Threat Research, or METER. If superintelligent AI can be everywhere all at once and is 100% free, not just in terms of price, but in terms of the real resource costs, let's say because it's powered by limitless renewable energy, then I agree, Tom. The logic of comparative advantage doesn't apply. If the AI has no energy cost and can replicate work infinitely and do everything all at once, this whole argument breaks down. We may get there someday, but currently I like my side of the ledger. The models are getting better. Most estimates of capability-adjusted inference suggest around a 5 to 10x efficiency gain relative to last year at this time. At the same time, the newest frontier models from OpenAI and Anthropic cost roughly twice what their predecessors did, mainly because both companies are so unprofitable right now and burning through so much cash, they will eventually need to charge something closer to the true cost of compute. Price increases are especially high for frontier AI models that are capable of advanced reasoning, which demands mountains of compute. Meanwhile, workers are burning through their token budgets in the first few days of a month, and many companies are starting to second-guess token maxing as a competitive strategy. All that is to say, I think there will still be some opportunity cost of AI compute for the foreseeable future. And that means the logic of comparative advantage still applies for now. Okay, so what is humans' comparative advantage? Our comparative advantage is our learning efficiency. The comparative advantage of AI, on the other hand, is knowledge, storage, and distribution. Let me explain that. People have way less storage capacity than AI models, and we can only be in one place at one time. But we are very good at learning patterns from small amounts of data, and we compress information very well so that we can store it efficiently into our memories. I want to illustrate this point with 2 very simple questions. First, who was the president of the United States on July 8th, 1881? Second, who is the president of the United States today, July 8th, 2026? The answers are James Garfield, whom I'm descended from, incidentally. My grandmother's maiden name was Garfield, and Donald Trump. And yes, Garfield had been shot 6 days earlier, but he was still the president. He held on until September. So here's my question. Which of those 2 answers came more easily to you? Your answer is almost surely Trump, because you are not living under a rock. But if you ask ChatGPT to answer both questions, the compute cost of obtaining the Trump answer is about 1,000 to 1,500 tokens. And that's 20x the compute cost of the Garfield answer. That's because GPT 5.5 must search for the current president on the internet. Its world knowledge ends on December 1st, 2025. And that means the model has to learn the answer to who is the current president, rather than recalling it from memory. And it learns by phoning a friend. Shout out to Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, great game show. And the friend it phones is the internet hive mind, which is still mostly human for now. And that distinction really matters because people really are much more efficient than LLMs, large language models, at obtaining new information. I asked GPT 5.5 Pro to estimate the marginal energy expenditure required for a person to recall factual information from their own mind compared to asking ChatGPT. Ironic, I know that I asked that question. In other words, given that you are sitting on the couch, zoning out, taking up space, how much extra compute does it cost you to remember who the current US president is? GPT 5.5 estimates human marginal recall energy at 0.05 joules, compared to about 50 joules for ChatGPT if it doesn't need to search the web, the James Garfield case, and somewhere between 100 and 500 joules if it needs to learn by searching the internet. So humans are somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000 times more efficient than AI at factual recall. What if you don't know the answer to my question? Many of you may not know James Garfield or Donald Trump, maybe. You can also phone a friend. According to GPT 5.5 Pro, again, asking another person who is the current US president costs much more energy than recalling it from memory. It costs about 2 joules. The AI hilariously breaks it down into asker noticing gap plus formulating question, asker speaking the question, respondent hearing or understanding, respondent recalling the fact, and respondent speaking the answer with energy estimates for each subtask. And that's still between 25 and 250 times more efficient than asking ChatGPT, assuming your friend is nearby or easily available. The bottom line is that large language models are incredibly inefficient learners. Why do you think GPT 5.5's world knowledge ends as of 7 months ago? Kind of strange not to update the model more frequently, especially since OpenAI has access to near limitless resources and has already filed an initial public offering at a possible valuation of $1 trillion or more. But the reason they don't update the model more frequently is that this kind of generalized learning where it learns current world facts up to today is hugely expensive and time consuming. A GPT 5.5 class model probably takes around 2 months to train, and then another several months to post-train and refine. The raw compute cost probably sits at around $1 billion, with another couple $1 billion in energy costs and human compensation again for testing and refinement. Ironically, again, I asked GPT 5.5 Pro to estimate its own training costs. It very clearly and repeatedly stated to me in bold that this was an outside view estimate and does not reflect any insider knowledge about OpenAI's actual training run. Whatever you say, chat. That's why AI models don't learn current facts. They search them up instead. The model can learn in context by having a conversation with you. If you prompt it to look up the current president, it will remember that fact for successive follow-ups within its context window. But the model doesn't really learn those facts in the sense that you or I would, because when someone else asks the same question somewhere else around the world, it has to search the web all over again to learn. The learning doesn't stick in between sessions or people. In a recent Substack post, Dwarkesh Patel estimates that human learning is somewhere between several thousand to 1 million times more sample efficient than AI models. In other words, we have a comparative advantage in learning from small amounts of data. There are lots of reasons for this, including some strong evolutionary reasons, which I'll get into next week. On the other hand, AI's comparative advantage is storage and distribution. Once AI learns a task, it never forgets, and it can replicate its performance forever at nearly zero cost. That's why the frontier AI labs are gobbling up whatever human performance data they can find. They're trying to solve the learning inefficiency issue with brute force and extreme scale. Companies like Mercor are paying people $100 an hour or more to perform extremely specific professional white-collar tasks, like writing marketing research reports or filling in spreadsheets. Some other Mercor job descriptions: North American teen humor expert, meme accuracy video specialist, agent voice cloning, and FIFA World Cup AI content writer. These are real jobs, people. What kind of economy could possibly support paying upper middle class wages to explain why the kids are laughing or professionalize being chronically online? The AI economy is driven by the reality that an LLM burns 1,000,000 times more tokens than a human to learn a task for the first time. But once it learns, it can automate that task at a small fraction of the cost of a human. With enough scale, that million-x fixed cost eventually gets paid back with very low marginal cost. So anything you do repeatedly and where the context is mostly observed, what AI people would call in-distribution tasks, will be absorbed into the model's initial learning and get automated. Software coding is the canonical low-context task. The code is easily verified. It either compiles or it doesn't. And my code should run the same as yours. Just as important, the task of software coding is very young in historical terms, which means that a complete description of how to do it is available online, unlike jobs like doctor or lawyer or politician that have been around forever. Rare tasks, what some people call long-tail tasks, are safer bets. Again, not because the model is worse at these tasks, but because the cost of context-adjusted performance is relatively high compared to humans. Comparative advantage will save us in tasks where good performance requires continual learning and updating of context. One last thing. Comparative advantage tells you humans will still have work. It does not by itself tell you what work pays and how much it will pay. That's a different question, and it is where part 2 begins. Next week, I will tell you what I think those tasks are and what I think humans will still be doing in the age of superintelligent AI. Before we conclude, a little housekeeping. The solo episode I released on June 24th has been our most downloaded and watched show so far. Maybe that means you want more of me. I think more likely it just reflects huge interest in current issues like AI and jobs. So I'll be doing more solo episodes like these and also bringing in some guests with relevant expertise. I remain really interested in your feedback, so please email me at david@thecontextwindow.com with ideas for what I can do better, suggestions for future episodes, or to follow the lead of some YouTube commenters and accuse me of being AI generated. If you prick us, do we not bleed? In all seriousness, no humans or animals or AIs were harmed in the making of this film, although several thousand tokens were burned in effigy. Thanks everybody for listening. See you next week.